For 3 years, I lived a double life. Married, a baby, a cozy home. It was a sweeter slice of heaven than I ever deserved. The only catch: my mother didn't have a clue. And who is my mother? Victoria Langford, the undisputed matriarch and CEO of Langford Enterprises. A corporate titan, ruthless and absolute. If she cleared her throat in the boardroom, 30 executives would instantly applaud the melody. Her blueprint for my life was pristine. An Ivy League degree, a prestigious European internship, a strategic marriage to Charlotte Mercer, heiress to the Mercer shipping empire, and eventually, taking over her throne. But my actual life path? I came back to the States, quietly slipped a ring onto Maeve's finger, had a son, and spent my nights stumbling out of bed at 3 a.m. to mix baby formula. Today those two paths collided, head-on, and everything shattered into a million pieces. At exactly 7:12 a.m., my son, Ollie, woke up burning hot. 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Maeve had tried calling me 6 times. I missed every single one. My phone was on silent, and I was dead to the world, trying to catch up on sleep on the Amtrak Acela. I wasn't slacking off. I was actually on a business trip. A high-stakes deal in Chicago. My mother was pulling the strings from Boston, and I was her boots on the ground. The moment I woke up and saw the 6 missed calls, followed by Maeve's texts, I bolted upright so fast I nearly hit the ceiling of the train. The texts read as follows. Willie, Ollie's fever is at 103. The ERQ is a 3-hour wait minimum. Your phone is dead. I'm taking him to the office. If you aren't back today, don't bother coming back at all. The last message was from 10 minutes ago. I stared at my screen, my brain scrambling to process the impending disaster. Maeve was bringing the baby to the office. Maeve worked at Langford Enterprises in the design department. The CEO of Langford Enterprises was my mother. My mother didn't know Maeve was my wife. My mother didn't know she had a grandson. In my head, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony started playing. Dun 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 dun. I frantically dialed Maeve's number. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. My hands began to shake. Look, I'm not a coward. Okay, maybe I am. But anyone who knows Victoria Langford knows she's the kind of woman who can reduce a 60-year-old board member to tears without raising her voice. Keeping a secret marriage and a child from her wasn't just a minor omission. It was dancing on a landmine. I desperately rebooked my ticket to the next train heading back to Boston, then typed out a message to Maeve. Maeve, please breathe. Whatever you do not go near my mother. I'm on my way back right now. The status bubble popped up. Read. No reply. Just read. Those 4 letters made my skin crawl far more than Ollie's 103-degree fever. Meanwhile, in the design department on the 4th floor of Langford Enterprises, Maeve cradled a flushed, sluggish Ollie in her arms, her face pale with exhaustion. Ollie's cheeks were bright red, his little body limp against her shoulder, letting out occasional, pathetic whimpers. Her original plan had been simple. Leave him tucked quietly in the stroller next to her desk, finish the final rendering on her design pitch, submit it, and sprint out the door. Diane, her senior colleague, leaned over, her voice a hushed, panicked whisper. Maeve, are you out of your mind? Bringing a baby to the office? If HR or corporate sees this, they'll dock your performance bonus in a heartbeat. Maeve expertly patted a cool fever patch onto Ollie's forehead. The clinic has a 3-hour wait list. His father's phone is completely dead. And if I don't turn in this layout today, the whole team loses their quarterly bonus. Her voice was steady, but Diane could hear the tremor beneath it, the quiet, dangerous calm before a hurricane. Where is your husband? Where the hell is he when you need him? Out of town, Maeve said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. Diane didn't dare push further. Honestly, things could have gone smoothly. Maeve's design was 90% complete, and Ollie was resting quietly, barely making a sound. And then Trevor walked in. Trevor was the newly appointed executive secretary to the chairwoman, an Ivy League graduate in a bespoke navy suit, with every strand of hair gelled into submission. He'd only been with the company for 2 weeks, but he had already managed to make the entire administrative pool despise him. He had one defining trait. He was an absolute master at sucking up to upper management, and his favorite way to do that was by throwing his subordinates under the bus. As he strutted past the design department, he caught sight of the stroller through the glass wall. Ollie was inside, sleepily chewing on his own toes. Trevor's eyes lit up. It was the look of a predator who had finally found the perfect victim to exploit for a gold star. He pushed open the heavy glass door, his leather Oxfords clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Whose kid is this? The room fell dead silent. Everyone looked up from their screens. Maeve's fingers paused over her keyboard. Mine, she said. Trevor walked straight to her desk, pulled a sheet of paper from his leather portfolio, and slapped it down right in front of her. Suspension notice. Maeve looked down at the paper, then raised her head. Her eyes were chips of dry ice. Excuse me? Trevor raised his voice, ensuring his authority echoed across the entire floor. Maeve, is it? Design department? What do you think this place is? A daycare? He glanced down at Ollie in the stroller, his lip curling in disgust. Bringing your little bastard to a corporate office. Unbelievable. The word bastard hung in the air. The temperature in the design bay plummeted to freezing. Diane's mouth fell open. Across the aisle, another designer accidentally spilled his iced coffee directly onto his mechanical keyboard. A bastard. He had actually called him a bastard. Maeve's eyes narrowed into thin slits. Anyone who truly knew Maeve knew that when her eyes narrowed like that, someone was about to get a metaphorical throat slash. But Trevor didn't know her. He kept riding his high horse. Think of the optics. Look at the rest of your colleagues. Maeve stood up. Her ergonomic chair rolled back violently, clattering against the filing cabinet. She bent down and lifted Ollie from the stroller. He was burning up, mumble-whimpering into her neck. Suspension, is it? Maeve's voice was barely a whisper. Fine. She picked up the suspension notice, folded it neatly into a tight square, and slid it directly into the breast pocket of Trevor's designer suit. Hold on to this. You're going to need it. Then, she turned and walked toward the executive elevators, cradling the baby. Trevor frowned, his face flushing. Where do you think you're going? Maeve didn't turn around. To talk to your boss. 5 minutes later, the executive suite. Victoria Langford was in the middle of a high-level meeting with 3 senior vice presidents. She sat in her black leather executive chair, twirling a classic Mont Blanc pen, marking up the quarterly reports. At 55, she was immaculate. Her presence alone had a physical weight that made people unconsciously hold their breath. No one dared waste her time. Last month, a department head had used the word basically 3 times during a pitch, and she had immediately reassigned him to logistics. Our Q3 margins are unacceptable, Victoria said, flipping a page. VP Harrison, I'd love to hear your explanation. The executive opened his mouth to speak. Bam! The double doors didn't just open, they were kicked. A heel had slammed into the wood, sending the brass handles rattling against the wall. Every head in the room whipped around. Maeve stood in the doorway, holding a flushed, half-awake baby. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her breathing shallow, but her gaze was rock solid. The Mont Blanc pen in Victoria's hand froze. Who are you? Maeve didn't answer. She walked straight past the VPs, stepped up to the mahogany desk, and laid Ollie gently on top of the polished wood. Gently, firmly, as if she weren't placing a 2-year-old child down, but a ticking bomb. Mrs. Langford, Maeve said, her voice quiet but heavy enough to crack the floorboards. Your grandson is sick. The air in the office died. The 3 vice presidents exchanged looks of sheer, unadulterated terror. Victoria blinked. Once. Twice. What did you just say? The son you raised so well, Maeve said, her words dropping like lead weights, hasn't been home in 3 months. His son has a 103-degree fever, and his phone is completely dead. She took a step back, locking eyes with the matriarch. This is your mess now. Deal with it. Silence. A suffocating 5-second void. Ollie stirred on the mahogany desk, blinking sleepily at his surroundings. He looked up at Victoria. In his feverish haze, his tiny hands instinctively reached out to the nearest adult. Up. Victoria didn't move. Her eyes traveled from Ollie's face, down to his small hands and back up. The shape of his eyes. The curve of his nose. He looked exactly like Willie had at that age. Victoria's knuckles turned white around her pen. Then she did something the vice presidents would talk about for the rest of their corporate lives. VP Harrison, VP Miller, VP Cole, she said, her voice cold enough to freeze water midair. Get out. The 3 men practically fell over themselves running for the exit. The moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut, they huddled in the hallway. Did I hear that right? Harrison whispered. Did she say grandson? The chairwoman's grandson? Miller swallowed hard. Does that mean Willie? Cole was already pulling out his phone. I need to call my wife. This is too big to keep to myself. Inside the office, Victoria stared at Maeve, her gaze sharp enough to pierce steel. What is your name? Maeve. Design department. And you expect me to believe this is my grandson? We're legally married. Maeve reached into her tote bag, pulled out a manila folder, and laid 2 sheets of paper on the desk. A copy of their marriage certificate. A copy of Ollie's birth certificate. Victoria looked down. On the certificate, Spouse A. Willie Langford. Spouse B. Maeve Langford. Date of registration, 3 years ago. On the birth certificate, Oliver Langford. Victoria stared at the name for 10 seconds. Willie picked the name. Yes, but we call him Ollie at home. Victoria took a deep, shuddering breath. Then another. She stood up, walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and turned her back to Maeve. A 30-second silence filled the room. Maeve didn't budge. On the desk, Ollie began to squirm, his little hand grabbing the Mont Blanc pen and shoving it straight into his mouth. Let me ask you something, Victoria said, her voice low and dangerous. You married him 3 years ago, which means that idiot never actually left the country. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. He did go to London, Maeve corrected calmly. But only for 6 months. Once we got married, he stayed right here in Boston. Then what about the photos he sent me every month? The academic symposiums? The dinners with his advisors? Photoshopped, Maeve said, completely unfazed. I edited them for him. Victoria whipped around. Her expression was a magnificent tapestry of shock, fury, disbelief, and a tiny, stubborn spark of curiosity she refused to acknowledge. You helped him lie to me? He begged me. And you just did it because he begged? Maeve's lips pressed into a thin line. When I married him, he swore on his knees he'd tell you within a year. But 1 year turned into 2, and 2 turned into 3. Every time I threatened to come clean, he'd literally cling to my legs and cry. Victoria's eye twitched. Her son, the hand-picked heir to Langford Enterprises. Her pride and joy, clinging to his wife's legs and sobbing. Victoria marched back to her desk, picked up the landline receiver, and dialed with enough force to crack the plastic. It rang. Once. Twice. He picked up. Willie, Victoria said, her voice deceptively calm. On the other end, Willie was sweating profusely, standing between the train cars on the Amtrak. Mom, where are you right now? I'm on my way back. How long? An hour. I'm giving you 40 minutes. She slammed the receiver down and immediately picked up her personal cell, speed dialing her driver. Hank, take the car to South Station. Pick up my idiot son. Tell him if he isn't in my office in 40 minutes, he shouldn't bother showing his face in this city again. Standing nearby, Maeve watched the execution of orders. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the look of a woman who had finally found someone capable of bringing her husband to heel. Just then, Ollie spit the Mont Blanc pen out onto the desk. Saliva coated the gold-plated cap. Victoria looked down. That pen was a limited edition. One of only 100 in the world. Her eye twitched again. The golden cap of the Mont Blanc pen rolled across the mahogany desk, leaving a faint, wet trail of drool before coming to a stop against a stack of Q3 financial reports. Victoria Langford stared at the pen. Her left eyelid twitched twice, a localized, seismic event that usually signaled the imminent termination of an entire department. Maeve didn't flinch. She stood with her arms crossed, her boots planted firmly on the Persian rug, watching the matriarch of Langford Enterprises with a cool, clinical detachment. He gets his drooling from his father, Maeve said softly. Willie still does it when he's stressed. Victoria's gaze snapped from the pen to Maeve. For a moment, the silence in the office was so dense it felt physical, like the air before a lightning strike. Then Ollie let out a dry, rattling cough, his small face scrunched up in discomfort. He shivered beneath his damp blue and yellow striped onesie, his tiny fingers weakly grasping at the air. Victoria's corporate mask didn't slip, but her hand moved. She picked up the landline receiver again. Get Dr. Eris up here. Now. Tell him to bring a pediatric kit. If he asks questions, fire him. She slammed the phone down, her eyes returning to Ollie. Slowly, almost as if she were inspecting a questionable merger, she reached out and pressed the back of her hand against the boy's forehead. Her fingers were cool, her rings cold, against his flushed skin. He's burning, Victoria muttered, her voice dropping into a register that wasn't CEO, it was maternal, buried under 30 years of corporate steel. He looked at Maeve, her sharp eyes scanning the younger woman's pale face and dark circles. And you look like you've been living in a subway station. I'm a designer in your 4th floor bay, Mrs. Langford, Maeve replied, her tone even. We've been pushing 80-hour weeks on the Mercer retail pitch. I haven't slept a full 6 hours since Tuesday. Victoria let out a cold, sharp sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. 80 hours? No wonder the rendering quality has been slipping. I'll have a word with the department head. Before Maeve could answer, the double doors of the executive suite creaked open. Trevor, the newly appointed executive secretary, poked his head in. His gelled hair was immaculate, his bespoke suit wrinkle-free, and his face carried the smug, eager expression of a golden retriever about to present a caught rat. Hadn't noticed Maeve's back or the baby on the desk yet, his eyes were fixed entirely on Victoria. Mrs. Langford, Trevor said, his voice dropping into a smooth, practiced baritone. I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a minor security breach. One of our low-level designers from the 4th floor has left her post without authorization, carrying, well, a domestic distraction. She was heading toward the executive elevators. I've already drafted her immediate suspension, but I wanted to ensure. Trevor, Victoria said. The secretary froze, his smile locked in place. Yes, ma'am? Victoria slowly stood up, her tall, elegant frame casting a long shadow across the mahogany desk. She reached down, picked up the saliva-coated Mont Blanc pen, and held it up to the light. Do you know what this is? Trevor blinked, his eyes darting to the pen, then to the baby lying on the desk, and finally to Maeve, who had slowly turned around to face him. His golden retriever expression faltered, a faint, cold trickle of unease sliding down his neck. "It's your Mont Blanc, ma'am. The limited edition." "It is," Victoria said, her voice deceptively soft. "And do you know whose saliva is currently corroding the gold plating?" Trevor's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked at Ollie, who was currently staring at him with wide, feverish eyes, letting out a small, wet sneeze. "That is Oliver Langford," Victoria said, each word dropping like a heavy iron weight onto the polished floor. "My grandson. The future heir to the company you currently work for." Trevor's face didn't just go pale, it turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray. The legal folder in his hand trembled, the papers rustling like dry leaves in the wind. You're and the woman you called a daycare nuisance and tried to suspend," Victoria continued, her gaze locking onto him with a terrifying, absolute coldness, "is my daughter-in-law." Maeve was it. "Yes," Maeve said, leaning against the desk, her arms still crossed. "He also called Ollie a little bastard in front of the entire fourth-floor bay, Mrs. Langford." The temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. Trevor's knees visibly shook. He looked at Victoria, his lips parting in a desperate, silent plea for mercy. But Victoria didn't deal in mercy. She dealt in liquidations. "Trevor," Victoria said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, his voice squeaking. "Take that suspension notice out of your pocket." With trembling fingers, Trevor reached into his breast pocket, pulled out the neat, square-folded paper Maeve had tucked there, and held it out. "Tear it up," Victoria ordered. "And then eat it." "Mrs. Langford." "Eat it," she repeated, her voice rising just enough to make the glass partition rattle. "Or I will have security throw you out of this building, and I will personally ensure that the only job you ever get in this city is cleaning the grease traps at a McDonald's." Trevor looked at the paper, then at the frozen faces of the three VPs who were still hovering near the hallway doors. With a look of pure, unadulterated humiliation, he tore the paper in half, stuffed a piece into his mouth, and began to chew, his throat working convulsively as he swallowed the dry pulp. "Now," Victoria said, not even waiting for him to finish. "Get out of my sight." Trevor practically fell backward through the double doors, the heavy oak panels slamming shut behind him, leaving the office in a silent, suffocating vacuum. Once more, at exactly 37 minutes after Victoria's call, the private executive elevator dinged. The heavy brass doors slid open, and Hank, Victoria's personal driver of 20 years, stepped out. He was a large, quiet man who had served in the Marines, and he was currently dragging a disheveled, sweat-drenched young man by the collar of his rumpled linen shirt. Willie. He looked like a man who had spent the last 40 minutes running behind a moving train. His tie was missing, his hair was a wild bird nest tangle, and his shoes were scuffed. The moment Hank released his collar, Willie stumbled into the office, his eyes wide and panicked as they darted around the room. He saw Victoria standing by the window. He saw Maeve sitting on the edge of the desk. And he saw Ollie, who was currently being examined by Dr. Eris, the family's private pediatrician, who had set up a miniature clinic on top of the mahogany executive table. "Willie," Victoria said, not turning around from the window. Willie swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down. He looked at Maeve. His eyes filled with a desperate, silent plea for help. But Maeve only offered him a cold, serene smile, taking a slow sip of the coffee Dr. Eris had brought her. "Mom," Willie gasped, his voice cracked and raw. I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Victoria said, slowly turning around. Her face was a magnificent, terrifying tapestry of maternal fury and corporate calculation. "I'm sure the explanation for 3 years of forgery, photoshopped academic symposiums, and a fake London residency is absolutely fascinating." She walked over to the desk, her high heels clicking sharply against the floorboards, each step sounding like a countdown timer. She stopped right in front of him, her presence towering despite her shorter height. 3 years, Willie," she whispered. "You had me believing you were attending lectures at the London School of Economics. You had me sending monthly allowances to an account in Barclays. And all the while, you were living in a 3-bedroom colonial in Newton, changing diapers at 3 a.m. Willie's shoulders slumped. The proud, Ivy League-educated heir to Langford Enterprises looked like a boy who had been caught stealing cookies from the jar. "I was afraid, Mom," he said, his voice dropping into a quiet, raspy register. "You had my entire life planned out. Charlotte Mercer, the shipping empire, the board seat. I didn't want any of it. I wanted to design. I wanted Maeve." He looked at Maeve, his eyes softening with a genuine, deep devotion that even Victoria couldn't ignore. "And then Ollie came," Willie continued, his tears finally breaking through. "He was so small, Mom. I was terrified that if I told you, you'd treat him like a business transaction. You tried to manage his life before he could even walk. I just wanted to keep them safe from the company. Victoria stared at him. The silence in the office stretched for 10 seconds, 15, 20. On the desk, Dr. Eris quietly finished administering a dose of liquid acetaminophen to Ollie, who let out a soft, sleepy yawn before leaning his heavy head against the doctor's shoulder. The fever is coming down, Mrs. Langford, Dr. Eris said quietly, packing his stethoscope. It was just a standard viral infection. He needs rest and fluids. I'll write a prescription for the congestion. Thank you, doctor, Victoria said, her eyes never leaving her son's face. Have Hank take the baby and Maeve to my townhouse in Beacon Hill. Tell the housekeeper to prepare the nursery room, the one we used for Willie. Willie's head snapped up. Mom, you're taking them to your house. Of course I am, Victoria said, her voice dropping into a cold, flat register. Do you think I'm going to let my grandson sleep in some drafty colonial inn, Newton, while he has a fever? As for you. She walked over to her leather chair and sat down, her fingers neatly organizing the Q3 financial reports. You're going to stay right here. Willie blinked. Here, Charlotte Mercer's father is arriving at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning for the final contract signing of our shipping merger, Victoria said, her eyes locking onto his with a terrifying, absolute clarity. The strategic marriage was part of the draft. Since you've decided to cancel your end of the deal, we have exactly 12 hours to restructure our entire corporate strategy, so we don't lose the Pacific route. She pointed to the stack of files on the corner of her desk. You wanted to be an architect, Willie? Start drafting. The next morning, the executive boardroom of Langford Enterprises was a stage of absolute, icy tension. The long, polished mahogany table was flanked by the senior executives of both Langford Enterprises and the Mercer shipping empire. At the head of the table sat Arthur Mercer, a towering, silver-haired man who looked like he had spent his youth pulling anchor chains with his bare hands. Beside him was his daughter, Charlotte Mercer. Charlotte was 26, immaculate, and possessed a quiet, sharp intelligence that made her one of the most feared negotiators in the shipping industry. He was dressed in a tailored cream-colored suit, her fingers playing with a silver stylus as she looked at Willie, who sat opposite her. Willie had spent the entire night in his mother's office. His eyes were red, his face pale, but he had a strange, quiet look of resolve on his face. Behind him stood Maeve, who had arrived at 8 a.m., looking fresh, clean, and carrying a new leather folder. Victoria sat at the center of the table, her presence commanding the room. Arthur, Charlotte, Victoria began, her voice smooth and professional. Thank you for coming. Before we begin the final signing of the Q3 shipping merger, there is a minor adjustment we need to make to the draft. Arthur Mercer's brow furrowed. An adjustment, Victoria? We spent 6 months negotiating these terms. The strategic alliance between our families was the foundation of the Pacific route security. The strategic alliance remains intact, Victoria said, her voice carrying an absolute, unshakable certainty. But the personal alliance, the marriage clause, has been dissolved. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Arthur's face turned a deep, dangerous shade of red. Dissolved? Victoria, is this a joke? My daughter is not a second-tier asset to be discarded on the day of the signing. I'm not being discarded, father, Charlotte Mercer's cool, sharp voice broke through the tension. She set her stylus down, her golden eyes looking at Willie, and then at Maeve, who stood quietly behind him. Willie is married. Arthur froze. What? I ran a private background check on Willie's domestic status 3 months ago, Charlotte said, a faint, amused smile touching her lips. I knew about the colonial in Newton. I knew about the baby. I just wanted to see how long it would take Willie to find the courage to tell his mother. She looked at Willie, her expression surprisingly warm. Congratulations, Willie. She's very pretty, and her design layouts for the 4th floor bay have actually been saving our shipping logos for 2 quarters. Willie let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders dropping in relief. Thank you, Charlotte. But the business remains, Victoria, Arthur Mercer muttered, his anger slightly deflated but his corporate instincts still sharp. Without the marriage, how do we secure the voting rights on the joint board? Maeve stepped forward. She opened her leather folder, slid 3 sheets of paper across the polished mahogany table, and stopped them directly in front of Arthur Mercer. This is the draft for the new joint holding subsidiary Mercer Langford Logistics, Maeve said, her voice clear, professional, and carrying the exact same weight as Victoria's. Instead of a marriage, we are proposing a 40-60 split on the holding rights, with the design and marketing departments of Langford taking over the entire branding of the Mercer fleet. This will increase your European visibility by 15% within the first fiscal year, without the need for a personal alliance. Arthur looked at the papers, then at Maeve, and finally at Victoria. She's good, Arthur muttered, a faint, respectful smile appearing on his weathered face. She negotiates like you, Victoria. She has her moments, Victoria said, a tiny stubborn spark of pride in her golden eyes that she refused to acknowledge. She stood up, reaching for her Mont Blanc pen. The gold cap had been polished clean by her housekeeper. Let's sign. 2 years later. The summer evening in Boston was warm and sweet, the scent of blooming magnolias carrying through the open windows of the Langford townhouse in Beacon Hill. In the backyard garden, Ollie, now 4 years old, healthy and strong, was running across the green lawn, trying to catch a yellow butterfly. Ollie, don't run too fast near the rose bushes, Willie called out from the patio, where he was fire grilling some salmon. He looked healthy, his linen shirt relaxed, his shoulders broader, the weary double-life exhaustion completely gone from his face. He had been promoted to Director of Design at Langford Enterprises, a position he had earned through 80-hour work weeks and 2 successful European launches that had nothing to do with his mother's influence. Maeve sat on the outdoor sofa, sipping a glass of white wine, her lap covered in a stack of new blueprint layouts for the company's new green energy headquarters in Seattle. The board approved the Seattle draft, Willie, she said, her voice warm. Your mother actually said the atrium design was acceptable during the morning meeting. Willie let out a loud, happy laugh. Acceptable? From her? That's practically a standing ovation. The back gate of the garden clicked open. Victoria Langford walked in. She was dressed in a simple, elegant cream-colored silk dress, her hair pulled back into a neat, dignified bun. Her corporate armor was gone, replaced by a quiet, soft warmth that she only ever showed in this garden. Grandma, Ollie shrieked, abandoning his butterfly and running across the lawn, his small, muddy hands reaching out to grab her silk skirt. Willie gasped, his face turning pale. Ollie, no, your hands are dirty. But Victoria didn't flinch. She knelt in the grass, ignoring the mud, and caught Ollie in her arms, lifting him easily and kissing his cheek. Her gold rings glinted in the warm evening sun, and her limited edition Mont Blanc pen, tucked securely in her breast pocket, remained completely safe from his grasp. He's fine, Willie, Victoria said, her voice carrying a quiet, unshakable peace. A little dirt never killed a Langford. She walked over to the patio, holding Ollie securely on her hip, her golden eyes looking at her son and her daughter-in-law. The salmon smells good, Willie, she said, taking a sip of the wine Maeve handed her. But the Q4 margins are still unacceptable. We'll discuss it in my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Willie smiled, clinking his glass against hers. Yes, CEO, he said. The sun slowly set over the Charles River, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, leaving the Langford family in a quiet, unscripted peace that no corporate blueprint could ever have designed.